So a good friend of mine once told me of an experience that she had. I personally have a lot of respect for this friend. I do believe that she's a spiritually enlightened person. So me using this example is not in any way attacking her character. But we did have a learning experience from her sharing this experience. Essentially, she had a kind of conflict or a little bit of an altercation with someone else. And in the midst of that altercation, she started to see herself as the bigger person, the more spiritually enlightened type of person. And so she started telling the other person, love and light. You know what? Love and light, which is essentially a term of, I free myself from you and I am too spiritually enlightened to deal with this kind of mess. So I wish you the best. I'm going somewhere else. And that only heightened the conflict. That only heightened the issues of what was actually going on. As me and this friend talked about it, it wasn't until I told her, like, well, you know that if somebody did that same exact thing to you, it just would have riled you up more. Are you sure that you were actually wishing her love and light? Or were you trying to maybe show off a little bit of how much better you were than her, how much more advanced you were than her spiritually, which obviously would trigger more defensiveness from this person? So today we're going to be talking about what many philosophers and spiritualists, enlightened people, whatever, like to call ego transcendence, and just pretty much what that even means to begin with. Let's get it. Okay, so first of all, we're going to do a little bit of review. I've done a video in the past on persona. Even though it was a little bit more venti, I still was able to get to the heart of what the persona is. And then I also did a video on the shadow and doing some shadow work. So with that, now comes the ego. And the ego is the third aspect out of four aspects of what we call the whole self. So there is the persona first, and then there's the ego, and then there's the shadow, and then all together, when you get those, you have the whole self. The persona is essentially how we cater ourselves to look like to the world. If you guys know about astrology, it's kind of like almost like your rising sign, if you will, like how you show up to the world, how other people will view you, and you kind of like catering your mask to be able to appeal to the world. Some people's masks are accurate, reflecting at least as much as they can of who they really are inside, so it's an alignment. Some people's masks are vastly different. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, then you check out my video on Jung's concept of persona, and also shedding skin. And then there is the shadow. The shadow is essentially the parts of us that we're usually very ashamed of, the parts of us that we either suppress subconsciously or we consciously suppress them. We try to hide them from other people. We may be aware of these aspects of ourselves, but we don't want other people to know about these aspects, or we may not be aware of these aspects of ourselves and we are denying them. And that's usually because if we're not associating with those aspects of ourselves, then we push them into the shadow. But when we bring them into the light, then we bring them into the ego. So the ego is actually the way that we view ourselves. Again, in astrology, and this isn't always, completely like transferable, but I would like to think of it as kind of like the moon sign, like how you look at yourself, how you view yourself, the way, your sense of self in a way. So the ego essentially is the part of you that is really tapped into, okay, I am this, I am this, I am this, I am not that, I am this. And the ego is essentially always trying to protect itself. So kind of like what I did in the shadow work video, I want to talk a little bit about the ego and what it composes of. So it's the center of consciousness. It is potential, intention, and will, the narrator of our narrative. Can only see the bad if it's like gerrymandered. So like pretty much like the ego, once it receives any type of like bad experiences or anything like that, because of how it is in nature and it always wants to see itself and the host in like the best light, then it can only receive the bad things if it kind of like wiggles and forces it into a good kind of light. The ego is also the part of us that's always trying to like protect ourselves. Like, so whenever we are saying something like, oh, that was not me, and we're pushing it kind of like into our shadow in a way, then that's the ego disassociating from something that is us. So again, I talk about this a little bit in the shadow video, but that's a very important part because the ego always wants to see itself in a good light. The ego is always trying to like make sure that like, oh yeah, we associate ourselves with good things. The way that we view ourselves, our self-concept is essentially all these great, amazing things, and the things that are not really us. Yeah, sure, we have like moments of that, but that wasn't really me. Like when I cussed you out, that's not really who I am, or like that's not really how I am. And in a lot of instances, yeah, no, that's true. But to disassociate completely from it is essentially suppressing your shadow, because the fact that you were capable of doing it to begin with does mean that it's part of who you are. And that's where a lot of this kind of like shadow work and ego work, persona work to get to the whole self really like comes in. Another thing about the ego is that the ego is a set point. If we think too much of ourselves, the ego will check us by bringing us down. And when we think too low of ourselves, then we overcompensate. So it's important to be honest and modest. Don't over nor undervalue yourself. So the ego is really important in that sense because once again, it's the sense of self. A lot of people try to kill the ego, and that's not necessary. Just like we all need a persona and we all need a shadow as well. You're not supposed to kill your shadow. So the ego is also part of you. Like you don't want to necessarily destroy your sense of self. You don't want to shatter that. But there is this aspect of transcending your sense of self, which we're going to be talking about throughout this video. And here are some prompts on kind of like getting tapped into your sense of self and like maybe getting a good idea of your ego. These came from Antonia Dodge, by the way. So shout out to her. Just like with the shadow work video, these are some prompts that she came up with during our session of the Dark Night of the Soul. Why do I matter? Number 2, what have I done that is worth remembering? Number 3, what changes do I need to be open to making? Number 4, what am I attempting to gain or prevent? Number 5, what do I love about myself? So as you reflect on a lot of these, then you can pretty much get a good example or a good idea of your sense of self and what your ego is really like composed of. And then when you get to that point, once you're able to really understand your concept of yourself, your own ego, now we start talking about transcending your ego. And what exactly does that mean? So I always felt like true enlightenment is being able to understand that you are part of something way bigger. True enlightenment involves more than ever having an attitude of love and being an embodiment of love, which I've made a few videos about this, being an embodiment of love. And the idea, I made a video also on like, I am not your enemy. And pretty much like just love in general. I think that the most truly enlightened people, the most truly wise people, they see that they're part of something way bigger than just themselves, because the ego is mainly thinking about itself. The ego is thinking about like, oh, how can I get ahead? How can I look good? How can I, be above other people? Which is why the irony or the paradox of transcending your ego is once you start to work like really hard to try to like transcend your ego, you can get even more of an inflated ego because you start to think that you are better than other people. But a truly enlightened person actually does not see themselves as better than other people necessarily. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still facts, it's just factual that there are certain basketball players that are better than other basketball players. There are certain, Olympians who can lift more or run faster than other Olympians. There's a difference between having that fact of like, oh, I just know that this is true, versus like not really doing that. Because also there's a thing about fake humility or fake humbleness, you know, where when you kind of like have this fake humility, if somebody's like gassing you up, like, wow, you know, you're able to lift like 200 pounds, like that's so good. Oh, oh, that's nothing. If anything, that's also a sign of an inflated ego, because you see humility as something that an egoless person or a transcended ego is supposed to have. And so you're kind of like feigning humility in order to force it. So it gets a little bit dicey. And that's what I was talking about with my friend at the beginning. Now, like I said, I do believe that she is an enlightened person, but in my opinion, she had in that moment a kind of inflated ego when she was telling the person directly, like, you know, love and light, love and light. Now, of course, in that moment, she was a little bit maybe heated and upset and everything. And so she wasn't maybe thinking as clearly as she would have liked to. And she wasn't representing herself in the best way that she would have liked to. But somebody who is moving or even in that moment in a very enlightened state would actually maybe even avoid saying love and light to that other person, but would rather just recognize in their mind, like, you know what? This conflict is unnecessary. I don't really know what's going over here. And I do want to protect my peace. But also, I kind of assume that something's going on with this other person as well. And maybe they don't intend harm. Maybe they don't mean this. Maybe they don't mean that. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm just going to bow out of this situation, even if it means looking like I lost face. Because at the end of the day, it might look like that to the other person and my ego might not be happy about it. But really, I've transcended my ego enough to know, like, no, the more important thing to do, really actually being the bigger person, but not thinking about yourself as like, oh, I am bigger than this person, I'm above this person, is actually being able to recognize the situation and be like, yeah, no, this is actually the most wise thing to do. And it's not so that I can like pat myself on the back and feel myself and make the other person seem like less than me, but rather just for the situation itself, to protect us both. I think that is actual ego transcendence. It's going past seeing yourself as like, you know, you're the center of the universe in some way, you know. Now, you still operate in the universe, you know. You are still an important aspect of the universe. But once you transcend your ego, then somehow you're able to understand the significance of being that one grain of sand on a beach and knowing that you still mean something. And there's a lot of complexity there, because somebody could look at the beach and think like, oh, one grain of sand is not going to make any difference, you know, because there's so many other grains of sand. And so that could be hurtful to the ego, because you're like, well, I'm not special. I want to be the grain of sand, you know? And the more that the ego starts to try to inflate, and the more that it doesn't want to see itself as like the other sand, you know? And to an extent, that's not bad, because that's sort of sometimes what helps us to be driven to achieve greater things. But at the same time, when you've transcended the ego, then you're also able to understand that being that one grain of sand means that even if you do all of these great things, you're still one of millions. And at the end of the day, even though you're still one of millions, you still have value. You still have worth. You still matter because you are matter. And that in itself is very humbling. And therefore, it takes the attention off of you just seeing yourself in this own self-centered way, and it creates an expansive worldview. People who have transcended their ego begin to understand that their perspective on things is not all that there is. People who are very inflated with their egos, they think that they're always right, whether it comes to morals, whether it comes to politics, whether it comes to spiritual views, whether it comes to facts, or like, you know, whatever they might think, history, they think that they're always right. And a lot of times these people are right about things. I'm not saying that they're always wrong, but they can't see past themselves and what they see because their ego is so inflated and in the way of that. But those who have actually transcended their ego, they know that this is no longer just about them, but it's about the collective. It's about something bigger. It's about the spiritual realm. And so it's less about, oh, I have to be the one to do this. I have to be the one to be great. I have to be the one to do this. And they're more thinking about, I have to play my role in the spiritual realm. I have to play my role in society. And once I'm able to play my role in society and get to this point, then I now know that I've done my part in history. I've done my part in this person's life, whatever it might be. And that's what's important, no matter how big or no matter how small. And I think another big thing about ego, which is probably one of the biggest things of them all, is that once you've really transcended your ego and you've allowed yourself to like balance with your ego, then you're able to see your own value. Like I've been saying, you're able to see your value and pump yourself up and, feel yourself, but then also see the value of other people. There's a difference between somebody who's really confident and cocky and thinks low of everybody else. Like, yeah, all of you guys suck. And, this is that I'm the best one. Y'all are so lucky to have me. Versus someone who is confident and knows their worth and their value, but then they also see the worth and the value of everybody else around them. Because then they know that, hey, look, I am just another one of y'all. So paradoxically, I'm very special and unique and important, just like all the rest of you in your own ways, because we all play a significant part. That, at least in my opinion, is true ego transcendence. So today, I want to ask y'all, what is your relationship with your ego? How do you view yourself? Do you ever find yourself being one of those people that's like, you know what? I'll pray for you. In that kind of attitude, like, I'm so spiritually mature, I'm better, I'm more enlightened, etc. And so, or do you find yourself to be someone, and being radically honest with yourself too, do you find yourself to actually be someone who can see past all of that and see past this competitive game and really just seeing the value in yourself and validating yourself, but also being able to validate other people? Are you a fake humble person? You think super highly of yourself, but you feel like you're not allowed to be able to say those things that you feel highly about yourself. And you see, the problem is not necessarily in boosting yourself up, at least not in my opinion. It's when you boost yourself up to tear other people down. But I don't think that we have a problem with those who think highly of themselves, but then they're also just as happy to boost everybody else up and think highly of them too. There's nothing wrong with being a king or a queen if you also recognize that there are other kings and queens. They're just ruling different kingdoms. And even as the king or the queen, you just play a role. Without your subjects, without the citizens, the people of your town, your country, whatever, then what really are you? Even as a leader, who are you without the followers? And you're only leading these people so that because you were once a follower. You cannot become a leader until you're a good follower, And so with that, you start to understand, like, I'm just playing my role. And even though I'm the leader right now, I'm actually helping to build a group of other leaders who are going to come after me. People who start to think about that alpha male versus beta male kind of thing. It's like, well, first of all, I'm going to make a video about that because that stuff is stupid, in my opinion. Like, if you're an alpha male in one group and then you go to some alpha male type of convention and now the person who's leading that convention is an alpha male over there, does that mean that all the rest of the people there are beta males? Like, stuff like that doesn't really make sense. And if anything, it's just really arbitrary and dumb. But the point of that is when you really start to see the value when you really start to see the value in actually being able to see your value in yourself, but continuing to also see the value in other people and not diminishing your light, but also not diminishing other people's light so that you can keep your light burning. Now you've been able to transcend your ego, but you've also been able to keep a balance without trying to kill your ego. And that's my thoughts. So I would love to know what y'all's thoughts are on this. If you have anything to add, anything that you feel like you'd like to edit, please let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, make sure to leave it a like. I've been staggering a lot of my videos lately, been busy learning a lot of stuff that I'm going to be teaching y'all soon. But yeah, I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this video. Share it with somebody if you feel like it'll help them, and lastly, more than ever for this video, don't forget, you matter. Done. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. And if you enjoyed that, please like and subscribe. It actually really helps out my channel a lot so that more people who actually care about what I want to say can actually find me a lot more easier. Also, if you did enjoy it, then maybe you'll enjoy a lot of my other content as well. So be sure to check out some of my playlists where you'll be able to find a lot of my older videos and older content. And last but not least, if you would like any profiling sessions or coaching sessions, be sure to check out denzelmensah.com where you'll be able to book me and you'll see the rest of my services. But thanks again and have a great day.